there, my friends, and welcome back to the Messy Middle Podcast / Dockless Fitness YouTube channel. I'm going to ask you before we get started today, if you were listening to your favorite podcast platform, to make sure you are subscribed and to rate and review the podcast. It means so much. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment below today if you learned something or, something you'd love to see in a next video. And if you really love my content, you'll go ahead and go to the other one and do the same thing as well. So today I want to talk about the question that I actually get asked a lot that is very simple, and that is, what is cardio? What counts as cardio? What is cardiovascular training? How do I know if I'm doing cardio? So cardio is all the rage right now. As we know, everyone's been talking about cardio, either how it's going to kill your gains, make you gain weight, or is absolutely necessary, is required for health and longevity or fat loss or all of the above. And it's leading everyone to thinking, well, maybe I should add some more cardio back in my training or reconsider the relationship with cardio. But a lot of people don't really actually know what that means. And does doing cardio mean that you have to become a runner, right? So to get started, I talk about running a lot on my page because I'm a runner. I coach people through running. We do running programs. I like to race, train, and run, but you do not have to be a runner or an endurance athlete at all to utilize and use cardio as part of your exercise training. When I'm not race training or in off seasons or when I'm cross training, I do a ton of other things to count as cardio within my training. And you can just do those. You don't have to run at all if you don't want to. And so cardiovascular training is specifically a type of training that is stressing your cardiovascular system, which counts as your heart, your lungs, your vascular system, which are your veins and arterioles going through your body, and leads to direct improvements in not only your heart's ability to pump out and transfer blood to your extremities, but also your muscles' mitochondrial capacity to bring in oxygen that your blood is delivering into it and use that for energy metabolism. So that part is key. So for a lot of people, they tend to think cardio is anything that gets your heart rate up, right? And that isn't quite true. A lot of things get your heart rate up, right? Like if you right now start thinking about something that stresses you out, or you go to do a public speech or whatever it is, that's going to elevate your heart rate. And that doesn't mean that you are doing cardio or you're having an increased cardiovascular response or central nervous system response to that stress and anxiety, but you aren't getting cardiovascular adaptations. That is the key difference. And so a lot of people think that any type of exercise as well that has some sort of increased heart rate response automatically means that it is cardiovascular training. And so there might be a cross overlap between different modes of exercise and health outcomes you get from cardiovascular training or benefits for your cardiovascular system. When I talk about this, I'm not to say that things like lifting or resistance training or mixed modes of fitness, like your group fitness classes or whatever it are giving you no benefits or that they aren't benefiting your cardiovascular system. There are overlaps and benefits that we see to your cardiovascular health through resistance training or other non-cardio specific types of movement. But when we're thinking about true cardiovascular training, we want to think about often single mode, continuous or interval-based activities that are requiring you to essentially, one, your heart rate is elevated, but two, utilize, uptake, and deliver oxygen in order to sustain that activity. And so when we are thinking about these types of movements, we're thinking about running, yes, rowers, bicycle, swimming, any type of continuous thing, an elliptical, stair stepper, a lot of cardiovascular type machines, or things that are allowing you to do continuous repetitive exercise that you can sustain for an extended period of time. Now, there's different ways to program that, right? Like you can do continuous steady state exercise, you can do moderate intensity, you can do, intervals or whatever it is, but it's generally types of activities that you could theoretically sustain for an extended period of time. So, you can dance, you can do circuit type training to some degree and have it count as cardio. But you really want to think about your classic cardio things, your running, your biking, your swimming, your rower, whatever that is, that's like a single mode type of activity that is straining and stressing your cardiovascular system. And so that's what we think about when we think about true traditional, by the definition book cardio, right? So when you're thinking about adding cardio into your week, you want to opt for these types of activities that are going to be specifically targeting and stressing your cardiovascular system for an extended or intermittent, interval-based period of time. And so a lot of things that I get asked when it comes to this is like, well, does walking count? Or does this class count? Or does this count? And so for many of you, if you are coming from a completely sedentary background, you don't have a history of physical activity, you've been largely not doing any sort of exercise, walking can count as this for you. And or if you're doing something like walking at an incline, it's not that the mode of walking itself doesn't count. It's often that walking's intensity for many people who have a baseline in fitness or other histories and training is often not intense enough to get you there. And the adaptations that you're getting physiologically from walking a mile aren't necessarily the same as running a mile, or doing an equivalent amount of cardiovascular at a higher output. And so we don't think walking is bad. I have another podcast and YouTube video episode on how many steps you need each day and why and how that is related back to health. I do think that you should walk often and break up your sitting frequently. But often people aren't walking at a high and hard enough intensity for it to give you the specific benefits of doing something at a higher cardiovascular level. Again, if you are just starting out or it's new to you, I don't want to create a barrier to exercise. And this might be enough. I mean, if you're doing something versus nothing, it is benefiting you, right? And walking to some degree has a large role in the benefits that we get for our health, but it's not the same stress as exercise or formal training itself. So it's a great place to start. But for many of us, you're going to need more to keep going, right? That progressive overload. It's like the equivalent of saying, well, yeah, you can start with the barbell in the gym, but if you want to keep getting more strength or more benefits or more gains and more fitness, you're probably gonna have to add weight to that. And that intensity component of running or duration or whatever that is, or cardio, sorry, not running, is a way to increase that. And so when we're thinking about cardiovascular training, you want to think of these modes of exercise that are going to be kind of hard, right? You're increasing your breathing rate. You're having to, work a little bit harder than maybe like you just walking through the grocery store is what we're looking for. And so the next question that I get is, do things like my circuit classes or my METCONS count as cardio? And the answer is yes, no, maybe sometimes. A lot of the times these classes will have a component of cardio in their training. So if you have a class that you're following consistently or like a good CrossFit box programming, you should have some sort of cardio included in that training, like an erg, like a bike, a rower, a ski, or a run component, Orange Theory, CrossFit, F45, whatever these ones are. That will usually be stressing your cardiovascular system while doing like low grade circuit training, which isn't really cardio or lifting. It's kind of just like in between. And metabolic conditioning through the CrossFit model is good for you from a cardiovascular standpoint and level. You're working through, muscular endurance and things like that. There's kind of an overlap, but these are not going to be true strict cardio. So if you're just a regular person who's working a couple days a week and you're trying to get a little bit of everything and you're doing these classes, there is some merit to doing a little bit true traditional cardio or doing some true traditional strength training alongside doing these. But that doesn't mean that doing them themselves is hurting your cardiovascular fitness. It's giving you benefit. But over time, if you find that you're recovering like slower or not where you'd like to be, your heart rate still stays really high, or maybe you're between intervals of things, you're not recovering quite as well, that's where you might want to focus on adding in more, aerobic development work or true traditional, longer, slower, steady state stuff, like zone 2 work to improve that within your training. So again, like walking's fine if you're just starting out, and if this is what you're doing in your training and you're only doing these classes and that's what you'll do, usually if they have good programming, they're going to have components of cardio mixed in there for you. Orange Theory is very cardio heavy. For example, it is moderate to higher intensity, similar with CrossFit type class. You'll have a lot of aerobic capacity type workouts. That is cardio. We program that in the list method for clients who don't want to do running or specific stuff. But when we think about erring towards that true cardio system, we're thinking about, doing things that are like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 plus minutes of steady state zone 2 work, or moderate intensity work that's maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes of like zone 3-ish threshold type area training that's more sustainable but harder, or our high intensity interval training, which are intervals of like 30 seconds to 4 minutes long, with a rest time that is equal to or twice that much or half as much that interval. That was a really bad way of saying that. So if you're doing like a 1 minute interval, you're resting for either 30 seconds, 1 minute, or a minute and a half, or 2 minutes in between, kind of spacing those out so you can fully recover. Or sprint interval training, which are short, high all out effort bouts with a longer recovery in between of like maybe 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, than that actual interval of like 10 to 20 seconds. These are all different ways to target different areas of that, your cardiovascular system. And we talk about that more in my zones video on like how different zones and different intensities benefit us within our training. But we're often going to be doing these on a bike, a rower, like a ski erg, an air bike, running, whatever that is, because it's going to allow you to produce more work at a consistent effort that it's going to actually be directly related to the strain on your cardiovascular system. What we see when we do things like CrossFit or these METCONS or the circuit training or whatever it is that your heart rate is going up, but the VO2 max or oxygen demand of that actual exercise is not going up linearly. So when you're doing true traditional cardio, you have this linear relationship between heart rate and intensity. That is why you can kind of guess your intensity in zones and VO2 max all kind of related to each other on this nice linear graph. But when we start doing things like adding in lifting or a higher straining component to it, that we're kind of bracing and we're breathing and we're moving and we're doing all these things, you start to have this decoupling where your heart rate will go up and you will be in a higher heart rate zone, but the actual oxygen demand of that is actually lower. And then if you were to do true traditional cardio where you're able to get that heart rate up and drive up that oxidative demand on your body, or target those tissues specifically with a type of exercise that is designed to work on oxygen delivery and uptake, depending on whether you're trying to, get better at developing mitochondrial capacity, aerobic capacity, whatever you want to call that, and that low, easier zone work below threshold, zone 2, as we've been calling it, everyone's been talking about recently, or your glycolytic anaerobic capacity, clearing out, using carbohydrate really rapidly during exercise, sustaining high power outputs, and they're all related to each other. But often you're going to be doing these things by using a true traditional form of cardio. So, if you're just doing general cardio for health, you don't really care about developing the specific energy systems, whatever it is, 3 to 4 days a week, find something that you'll do for at least 20 minutes. That is some sort of strict form of cardio or mixed form of cardio. I would opt for maybe at least 1 or 2 strict form of cardios each week, mix in whatever else you want the rest of the time. It's probably not that serious. The less you do, the more intense you can go more often. The more you do, start focusing on doing more easy stuff to more hard stuff. You won't die if it's not all zone 2. You won't die if it's all hit. It really just depends on how much you're actually doing each week. But when we're thinking about cardio, that's what we want to be thinking about. And the minimal exercise guidelines for health shows about 150 minutes per week of moderate to harder intensity activity. And moderate intensity starts at pretty much like a really hard power walk to easy run for most people. That starts to fall into that moderate to vigorous activity, and walking can kind of fall into that too. There's some overlap there, but my bias lies in the fact that I think that the benefits of true traditional cardio are different and not the same. The minutes you spend doing true cardio are not the same as you're doing actual walking. And so that is one nice thing the guidelines do factor in, is it's 150 minutes of moderate to easier intensity stuff. Or 75 minutes of vigorous. So the more intense you go, the less you have to do. And I also think that you get sometimes a little bit more benefit from stressing and straining your system a little harder, at least once or twice a week. I think that, we do a disservice to people to acting like easy walking, or, the Fitspo bodybuilding people try to act like walking replaces cardio entirely, and the adaptations are simply different. They are both necessary. We want to walk often to break up our sitting. We want to do low, easy work, but we also want to do some hard stuff too. But when we're thinking about true traditional cardio, we are thinking about your steady state based erg systems where you could do that mode of fitness theoretically indefinitely and keep going. Now, you don't necessarily do that in all of your workouts, but that is what we're going for. So it can be your running, it can be your biking, it can be your rowing, it can be your skiing, it can be dancing, it can be swimming, it can be hiking, it can be, rucking, depending on how hard and intense you're going. It can be stair stepping. You think about the things that are straining your cardiovascular system. They're increasing your drive to breathe more frequently, and it's probably going to be considered a cardiovascular activity. So hopefully that answers the question and covers what the heck is cardio, what counts as it, how does this apply to my training, and where those things kind of fit in. I'll have to maybe unpack in a later episode, how CrossFit or METCONS or that type of training falls on the spectrum of aerobic versus strength training, because there's a little bit more to unpack there and what it means and what that looks like. My bias lies that if you're going to do anything, you should do something like that with a little bit of strength training, a little bit of cardio each week for just general fitness. If you love that mixed method mode type class for fitness, whatever it is that you're doing for that. Or if you're a true beefcake lifter or someone who's completely unfamiliar with cardio, just adding in some easy sessions each week to start, maybe 1 or 2 HIIT days or anything like that. So hopefully releasing this fall or early next year will be our cardio only subscriptions through the list method as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We know a lot of you kind of want to just have workouts to grab and go and do, and you don't want a structured program or need it. You just need something to, get your cardio in. And if there's anything that I'm okay with, it's like if you're going to have some variability in your program, do it in your cardio. So hopefully you guys found this episode helpful and a little bit more clear on like what even counts for cardio and are you doing it? And you all get your cardio in each week. So if you found this helpful, let me know in the comments. If you have any other questions about cardio you'd want me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments on YouTube below. Otherwise, if you are listening to this on the podcast and you found it helpful, be sure to share it to your stories on Instagram and tag me when you're listening. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. And otherwise, I will catch you guys on the next one.